Ladies and gentlemen, we are Debate Sensei. It is Wednesday. We got Tim Seavey from San Diego State University. Yeah, I'm Jared Kubika Miller. I am your debate coach, professor of communications. Matt Shapiro is out right now. He is petitioning to get on the shuttle to Mars, the first one. Yeah.
There's a lot of people that are on that petition, but I think he's got the jaw structure for it. I think he can pull it off.
Yeah. I'm sure Elon
I'm in there,
appreciates it. Yeah.
Everybody needs a guinea pig.
Yeah.
On the subject of our good old buddy Elon,
yeah.
What are we talking about tonight, Jared? What is fourth week?
So this week we're doing our sort of real world analysis about debates that are happening, and there is only one topic that everyone is debating about right now, and that is the impact of Elon Musk buying Twitter. And everyone is wondering what's going to happen. Like I'm a little upset about how much like coverage this is getting. You know what I mean? Like, I understand it's a big story, and like I'm glad that people are talking about it, but it's a lot. It's like it is overkill as far as like, okay, somebody bought Twitter.
And like Will Smith stuff sizzled though, like that's dead. So they're like, what do we yell about 24/7?
Yeah. I mean, like there's still, we still have a war happening in Ukraine. You know what I mean? And so,
there's that.
That's still getting coverage, but this is I think we're going a little excessive on this. Still, it is good fodder for discussion. So we're going to try something a little bit different by adding, kind of adding a little bit of structure to this. So my thought was like, how do you take real world stuff that's happening and use it to prepare for debate? Not just talking about it, but like, how do you anticipate how it might be a part, around, you know what I mean? And so you could take that stuff with you into a round. And so what we did was we brainstormed a few potential topics. We're wording them, and we'll probably riff as we go, but we're trying to follow the sort of, a variety of topics, not all just like policy topics, but a bunch of different like potential topics that you might get specifically in limited preparation debates.
Right. Well, and especially with this weekend being the PSCFA cool off, some folks will be experiencing debate for the first time, and this being a super popular topic, pretty decent chance that it will come up one way or another, IPDA or NPDA.
Yeah. So what we got is Tim and I, we brainstormed like 3 topics. We're going to go through them one at a time and, talk about what sort of arguments would kind of come up and on affirmative and negative. All right. So without further ado, let's the first one. I love this one. I saw that a lot. This is great because it's like one of the few fact resolutions. People get weirded out by the term fact debate because they're like, it seems like an oxymoron, right? Where they things like, oh, you're only allowed to talk about things that aren't facts in debates. They're like, no. It's like we're debating on, is this true?
Yeah.
Is it true?
Right. So in your criteria, this is a very unique fact rounds, is generally preponderance of evidence. So on the affirmative side and on the negative side, who can build a bigger pile of evidence that says that Elon is trolling or that he is not, right? Examples on the affirmative. You got any like out the gate?
So on the criterion, like just to expand upon that a little bit more, I like coming up with like things that are sort of measurable, like things. And so a preponderance of evidence, but specifically on whether or not this Twitter is actually going to go through.
Okay.
All right. Because even though Twitter accepted the deal, that does not mean that the deal is done. You know what I mean? Right. I think there was, and so the one example was about how he had some other business venture where he said he secured the funding and he was going to
He was going to make Tesla private. He was going to personally buy back Tesla. It had
Right.
gone public. He was going to personally buy it back. This was early 2021, I want to say.
Something like that. Yeah, but I think there's actual multiple examples in various different ventures where he said he was going to do one thing and then it just kind of fell through and he never even mentions it later. And so so I think that would be the examples you're going for, but that's also like the criteria. He's like, listen, I don't think that this deal's actually going to happen. You could be like, that could be your criterion to some degree. It's like, if you think that there's any way that this deal is just not going to happen, that he's just going through all this just to make people sort of get up in arms or just lose their mind,
sure,
then that's why you're voting for the affirmative.
And he's thoroughly enjoyed doing it, right? Like he posted polls of like, should I sell a third of all of my stock in Tesla or whatever, like, and literally just as a poll, and based on what that poll said, he did. Like, it's silly. And I think you can probably make the argument that when you are a multi-centibillionaire, like, what matters? Like, really, on a day-to-day basis, what matters?
Yeah.
Like, not a lot, right? Like, so you can kind of do whatever you want to do in the private sphere, and no one's going to say no. And it's funny, right? So to the subject of trolling, like, he's done it many times in the past and just enjoyed the attention. So
another way you could go is like, you could say, okay, it's not whether or not the deal is going to go through, but it's whether or not he's actually going to make any significant changes. Like it could be like, is he actually going to take it private? So maybe he is going to buy it, but when he said he's going to take it private, he's not going to do that. Or he's not going to make substantial changes to like the content management end of it, right? You can point out that like Europe said, it's like, hey, listen, if you don't regulate this to some degree, you're going to be at risk of like getting banned in the EU. And so you'd say it's like, yeah, Elon's he's not gonna stare down the European Union. He's not going to risk losing all of those users to make a freaking point or something like that. So
and I think it also tends to be the case that like the first half is PR and flash and the second half is the actual business dealing. So it could be just like, all right, his publicists and PR team are saying like, yeah, drum up as much as you want, go wild with this thing, like make it seem like you're going to just completely set it on fire and do something hellacious, when in actuality it's just gonna get more people interested in it, drive up the stock price, make a hell of a lot more money for him, and then he can do with it what he so chooses. That probably is a lot more sane and stable and minimal, right? Politicians pre-election versus post-election, right? All razzle and then very rarely any dazzle.
Patrick, I do think that there is a chance, or like it does open up the door for a lot of ad hominem attacks, but I think some of the arguments that we were talking about just now aren't ad hominem. They're very much based off of evidence and looking at past behavior as a way of predicting future behavior, which is the best you can go off of when you're trying to do something like this. So
there was a thing that came up on the negative side. So like the evidence on the other side, if you got this as a fact round, he would not be able to really do as much change as maybe some people are speculating. He wouldn't be able to like remove all content restrictions and things like that. So he did have to sign a deal with the SEC in 2018 because he owns public companies. You're restricted to what you are and are not allowed to say in like mass media circles because of that. So to that end, I think that already starts to create some fences around him. Plus, like Twitter has already shown that there exist ways that like the public sphere can step in. So I think we're talking, before we got on, Section 230 comes up as a topic, and we'll discuss this more when we get to policy. But as we're just trying to figure out, is this real? Is this not real? Some of the limitations that exist may just mean that it's infeasible for him to be able to buy something like this, or it's just not worth buying it, not just from a financial, but from like, a usability standpoint. It wouldn't actually be worth him getting it.
All right. Let's do our value. Here we go. The value round. Here we go. Here we go. Pretty straightforward. Now you could do it. Other topics might be like a this versus that thing, and so like I haven't really seen too many debates in the public sphere about like how this is going to affect like users across platforms. Is like, is this good for Instagram? I don't know. Like
Yeah, would
I
it
didn't see
displace
anything
people?
like that. Yeah.
Probably, right? Like, so I'm kind of just surprised in general that like Twitter is even still getting any attention. Like, I almost feel like maybe Elon lost a game of like rich man's dice to Jack Dorsey and was like, all right, I'll plug your thing and drive the stock price up just because, you know, I owe you one or something like that. On the subject of trolling, I guess. But when it comes down to this one, I think you have to first question, is it good or is it not good to have people on Twitter?
Oh,
right?
yeah.
Like, so if you assume that Elon Musk owning it would probably drive people away or restrict things or let it be a more, you know, fake news filled platform or more hate filled platform or more whatever your fear is, because his intention is very much there needs to be more free speech, there needs to be less restriction on Twitter. If that's the thesis of what he's going into it, take that at value of like, okay, even if he's is able to accomplish exactly what he wants, what does more free speech on Twitter mean? Like, who is that good for, right? Like, is that good for the entire world and democracy and, I don't know, like the free flow of information and the success of markets and like the safety of human beings? Or like, what criteria are we defining as good here? So I would probably just start immediately paring this down, because I think if you make freedom of speech your value, that's a fairly thin value. Like, I don't think you're able to peg that down to like, you eventually have to come to a terminal value like safety, right? Or you know, free markets, or health and happy prosperity of human beings, right? Whatever, or prosperity of the planet, or environmental good. You've got to be able to nail it down to something more significant. Because of that, I wouldn't go that broad with it. Of like, I think I'd probably just go like, is it good for the platform?
Yeah, yeah. So like that's where the definitions really come into it. And I still think that there's plenty of debate to be had, even if you define it that way. You know what I mean? It's like it will not be good for Twitter. I think is there is still plenty of ground on both sides of that debate, as well as will it be good for the average person. Is a very different debate, but still very debatable. You still have so many different positions that you could come at it with that. Yeah, I think you could, like, on the affirmative, you'd be able to really throw your opponent for a loop. Or at least the negative is kind of in the dark until they have to like prepare for everything. You know what I mean?
Sure.
In this
Could be a pretty narrow or really, really broad debate. You're right.
Yeah, yeah.
So
One of my criteria that I would like to go for on this one, like just for creativity, I would be interested in seeing this debate would be whether or not it's good for mental health. I mean, like, because
I like that. Yeah.
Yeah, because you could talk like, because that one doesn't necessarily assume what he will do for, as far as free speech, whether or not he's really going to open up Twitter a lot more or not. But it's like, if he does, you could still have a story about how that's going to screw with people's mental health. And so when you're talking about like terminal values, that was kind of sparked that inspiration. I'm like, yeah, I mean, you could do safety, but I think just people, I don't know, man. Like the social media has, I think, been contributing to a lot of mental health issues. And will Elon's sort of management of Twitter, or at least his influence over it, make that better or worse?
Yeah, I think you've got to start asking bigger questions like, is Twitter, let's start with like, is it good that Twitter exists? Like, and this is where I'm very, very pessimistic. I think no. Like, I don't think that Twitter is a good thing. I don't think it does good for the world, like in a net way. Like, sure, there's plenty of benefits, I'm sure. But I think if you really had to weigh it out, I think that Twitter does more harm than good. And like, I think most classrooms out there will have social media does more harm than good debates. I think that's a very common one, popular topic to come up. If you're not already prepared for that, definitely read up on it, because that will very likely come out in novice type debates. So this weekend with end of semester and stuff like that. From that end, I think that because Twitter is even less dialogic than some other platforms, like by having limited character counts and by having limited comment like responses, I think it is less dialogic and promotes less deep communication, so shallower communication than most other channels. So to that end, like I think that it's a bad thing more than it's a good thing. And so I guess you can start like pulling in examples of like, social movements that would not have taken the world by storm as significantly if it were not for Twitter, right? Or like, like Arab Spring or Me Too movement or Black Lives Matter, or like pick any particular like major mass movement that Twitter was instrumental in the, push for that going bigger. But I think we can also argue like the space is pretty damn crowded at this point. Like there are a lot of social media options. I don't think that the world would be worse off tomorrow if Twitter didn't exist. Like I'm sure a bunch of companies would lose a bunch of money and boo-hoo-hoo. Like I don't think that like anyone's life would really be actually negatively impacted by Twitter not existing. Besides like the employees at Twitter, and they'll all get better jobs too.
Yeah. Then the question is whether or not Elon owning Twitter will actually make Twitter stronger or weaker, right? So if you're like saying it's like, because you could turn that around, you're like, you're right, Twitter sucks, and the Elon owning it is the best thing to happen because he's gonna burn that thing to the ground.
Sure. Well, and so there's where my like total pessimist defining first, is Twitter bad? Now we can say like, and there's opportunity for it to be something really great. Cool. Okay, because then you can start laying out what that could be.
Yeah, some people, especially in rural areas in the world, it doesn't even matter what country you're in, that being in rural areas means that like people who find themselves having alternative orientations, have a really difficult time expressing that. And so being able to connect with other people. On the other hand, it's also a way for people to find out about those things and identify them and crack down. So there's you know what I mean? And so like the things about like
and stalk and exploit and
you know what I mean?
And so and whatever, all that stuff too.
Yeah, and
so like, and this is not an indictment of the internet, obviously, by any sense. I think it's like Twitter as a platform, when compared even to something that I think is also evil, like Facebook, but like even compared to Facebook, I guess if I had to say, I guess I would probably say that Twitter's worse. So it's like maybe Twitter is more accessible in more places. Like maybe there are some countries that allow Twitter and not Facebook. I don't know of any off the top of my head, but I think that there are enough platforms, there are enough social, spheres out there that people can connect, that I don't think that the loss of Twitter would be a bad one. But that also, I guess, is ignoring, as you said, the upside, like the potential upside of like, okay, what could Twitter be that just makes it something, shining in gold? If it could somehow be the source of truth and news that was, free from the restriction of any governmental body, free from any, power that be, and not influenced to become an echo chamber or something, right? So like, I think that would be a really interesting one if Elon was like, yep, we're going to remove all like bubble filters, like, how circles exist in social media, where it's like people are more likely to see content that they agree with and that they don't. If you were to be like, no, we're going to remove all of that, and it's just, you see whatever is out there, maybe that could create a little bit more open world. Like I think it's an opportunity for one single person that takes a major issue with social media as a channel to change it. The thing is, damn, that's a whole lot of power in one person's hand, right?
Yeah, okay.
I mean, I think like, so Web 3.0, I think if we're really kind of getting into it, like Twitter is a cornerstone of Web 2.0, where you've got a very small handful of giant companies, Google, Facebook, Twitter, that own pretty much all content creation, and Amazon, right? Or like all content, anything on the internet, you're basically going to these very small few channels. But the problem is like that's really not sustainable. One, from just like an antitrust thing, like even if they're able to get past the laws of it, like people get really sick of it. That's I think why so many people really rally against some of these major names. Like I don't think many people out there really love some of those companies that are listed. The Web3 direction is like, okay, you have DAOs, like distributed autonomous organizations on, Discord or on Slack or on, various other channels like WhatsApp and whatever. You have other ways that people organize and find and share information and sell and buy things. Like you've got other modes of communication besides the entire internet funneling to these few companies because they're big enough that they bought every damn other company under the sun, right? So I think like Web3 is maybe a better solution to it. So it almost feels like Twitter's on the verge of irrelevance anyways, is if I'm really getting deep into that debate in like an IPDA round with a lot more time to like talk through a bunch of stuff, that's probably where I'd go.
Yeah. But as far as there's some drawbacks to dark web. I think we start getting into a tangent there. You know what I mean? It's like I don't know if Twitter would fulfill that. I mean, unless you're advocating that Elon is going to take Twitter in that direction. I'm not sure. You know what I mean? So, all right. Anyways, we got our this is our brainstorming for what we think a very likely policy topic would be on a Twitter resolution. Yeah.
Meaty stuff.
I think Elon was talking about this about how, I mean, this is like the thesis of his approach, you know what I mean, where he was very critical of what the Hunter Biden story about, like Twitter was really big on like saying, no, we don't want that, we don't want to be a part of like interfering in the election. So we're going to, like nerf that story. You're not gonna be able to link to it and shit like that. And so, and Elon did not like that at all. And so, at the time when that was happening, the FCC chair Patel was talking about. It's like, yeah, we're going to help clarify Section 230, and it seemed like this sort of coordinated effort just to get the Hunter Biden story into the people's feeds. I mean, it's like, oh my god, really? Okay, but anyway,
well, I mean, when you got too much money and lobbying only costs so many dollars, like, yeah, you can kind of lobby whatever you want.
yeah.
But so this is an interesting one, right? Because the federal government can't make a claim saying that this private individual cannot, or that a private individual can't buy this company. It's a free market. Like we've got the capability, whatever. Like unless there's some active, contract in place or some law that's barring him from doing it, like he's legally allowed as a private citizen to buy a company that chooses to fairly legally sell itself. Now that gets into all kinds of, I mean, it's tough because it's not an antitrust case, because it's not like Tesla is buying Twitter or like, SpaceX is buying Twitter. It's like he personally, and I don't think there's a law against like a single person owning too many companies, right? So there isn't like even a legal precedent to break something up like that. But this is a way. So if I understand this correct, and hopefully you can clarify if I miss it. So Section 230 says that there are limitations around what a service provider, in this case, like bigger than Twitter, is allowed to say. So there can be limitations, legal limitations, on what information dissemination platforms like Twitter are allowed to say. And those come to things like hate speech, inciting violence, etc. There can be laws that cease those platforms from making those claims. Am I getting that right?
I guess you might be, like, because I don't have all of 230 at the front of my mind, but the main thing I know about the Section 230 is about how social media companies can't be held liable for stuff that is posted on there. They're considered, they're like private entities as well, and so that also shields them from any sort of regulation from FCC can regulate things that are inappropriate, specifically broadcast television stuff. Like that's why you can, like nudity and vulgar language and stuff like, and violence, it can be regulated by that. But I think Section 230 comes into play in differentiating social media from broadcast.
Okay. So I was totally wrong. So I was,
maybe I'm wrong.
Specifically reads, no provider or user of an interactive computer service shall be treated as the publisher or speaker of any information provided by another information content provider. So Twitter, so just because someone posts a hateful tweet or someone posts a lewd tweet or a violent tweet, that is not Twitter being held liable.
Right.
Yeah, that's pretty bad, right? Like that feels a little like Citizens United, right? It's like, oh, we didn't say it. We just happened to create the platform that allowed a jillion people to see and follow this particularly lewd or violent or hate-inducing speech. Like, that seems like a pretty badly passed buck there. So yeah, I think that probably should be tightened down. But that's if I'm on the affirmative there, clarify. Damn, that's a rough resolution. Probably, I think you'd probably have to. I don't think that any tournament director would allow that through. I think it would probably be a little bit more directional of like, should tighten restrictions on media providers through Section 230, or should clarify Section 230 to tighten regulations on, or to loosen regulation. I mean, there's I guess there's none. So I think the only direction would be like to tighten regulations.
Yeah, and I think that's where most people are leaning towards when they talk about clarifying Section 230. But yeah, in ways in which that you can do that. I'm not enough of an expert in the background on this stuff to necessarily speak intelligently about it. But like specifically when it comes to like bots and how they can spread stuff, and whether or not the social media companies could be held liable for allowing bots to spread information like that. Man, like that also gets rough on how do you craft a regulation for that? Like, how do you make sure that is enforced fairly but also efficiently? Because if the speed at which this stuff comes out, the FCC can is reviewing broadcast stuff before it comes out. That's nowhere near the speed at which these or the volume at which these stories on a social media platform has. You know what I mean? I don't like so. Does
that create like a state funnel or a state filter?
Yeah.
Right. To all content? Like, does it have to be checked by the government before it can go through? Because like, that sounds really, really gnarly too. Like that kind of takes away the entire democratized for the people kind of feel of the internet. So I think on the negative side, you've got some good ground to stand on, that it's like, this is one of the only places that true free speech can exist. And like, this is an opportunity to stand up for free speech instead of continuing to impose regulations on it. Mm-hmm. And I think so I think the Hunter Biden examples and stuff like those come out as just like, it feels like more tabloid as an example, but like, if there are actual important stories, right? So, but previously suppressed stories that would make it through, but if the government were in the way of it, they could, stifle some stuff. I think there are good arguments to be made there. There's probably like good discussions, entirely outside of elections, because it's, hyper politicized, even just around like public health and COVID related standards and like fake news and stuff going out that hurt people versus like real benefits that also were, real things that were just not made public quick enough, right? Because the government didn't act fast enough, or because it was seen as something generally related to COVID at all, there was suddenly now a filter around it, and it was useful information that actually could have saved more lives because it was legit and bona fide and tested and whatever. But the government filter that, the censorship ended up, stifling it. So I think it's a tough task on the negative, but I think you just got to come up with a bunch of cases for very explicitly like why free speech helps make life better, and why a limited or regulated speech makes life worse.
Yeah, I think I love how okay, so when social media was not going the direction of a Republican president, they started looking into clarifying Section 230, and then we get word that Elon is buying Twitter, and now the Democratic president is looking into Section 230. And you can just take the articles that I'm reading and erase the name of one Republican senator and replace it with another Democratic senator, and it's exactly the same. You know what I mean? And they're trolling each other like, "Oh, you don't like it, huh?" And it's like, like I'm literally seeing, it's like, isn't it funny how nobody cared about Section 230 until Elon Musk bought Twitter? I'm like, no, like there's plenty of times where they're talking about Section 230. You know, it's just when it wasn't going the other direction that you
Right.
decided to make it. So yeah. I don't
Yeah.
know. I've seen that too many times in my life where people just switch sides and nobody even pays attention. No, like you are the exact opposite
filibuster, right?
years ago. Yeah.
Like the number, especially when you've got like these dynastic Congress people that have been in there for like generations, like the number of times they have said diametrically opposed things about the filibuster because it didn't benefit them in that moment. Like, like insane, right? So all this kind of stuff is, yeah, it comes up and is interesting. And I think in a debate round, it is your job to try and sift through that muck and be like, no, we're not going to just take whatever the headline says for granted. Is this good in the long run? I think it's your job to try and create a criterion that's a longer view, or that is not just a politicized one, because there will be a tremendous amount of researchable news out there on the politicized avenue. I think it's a tougher but a more worthwhile task to create arguments and criteria and terminal impacts that are bigger picture than that.
Yeah. All right, everyone. That is our time. Okay. It is Tim and Jared for Debate Sensei. We will see you next week. All right. Bye.
Happy night.